And we are very honored to have both Bill Aron and Vicki Reikes Fox joining us. These are two individuals whose names have really become synonymous with Shalom Y'all. Before we jump into our conversation, however, I would like to thank all of you for joining us, both via Zoom and also via our members watch party downstairs. I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. It will also be posted to our YouTube channel later. So please feel free to share it with family and friends, anyone who has not had an opportunity to join us here tonight. I'd also like to encourage you to visit our website at msje.org, and there you'll be able to sign up for our monthly newsletter. Also would like to invite you to join us and follow us on social media. These are the two places where you'll be able to find out about exhibitions like this, programs like this, and also a way to stay connected with us here at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And then finally, I would love to invite everyone here to help support the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience by visiting msje.org/support. You are all essential to what we're doing here. So thank you for helping your ongoing support and providing ongoing support, because you're the reason why we're able to provide programs like this one tonight. So tonight, we get to dig into some of the stories that are behind the images in our inaugural exhibition in the special exhibition gallery, which is where I'm standing right now. So currently we have on view Shalom Y'all, a snapshot of the Southern Jewish experience. So just as an overview of tonight's experience with us, we're going to start by doing a little bit of a history of what this project is. How did it come together? How did Bill and Vicki meet each other and embark on this photography road trip? After that, we'll dive into some of the individual stories behind these images. You'll get to hear about how they came together, some of the funny stories, some of the challenging stories, and really take a look at what came together to make this exhibition happen. We also have some images selected that are actually not on view currently in the exhibition. So that's going to be a special treat for all of us. And then finally, we'd like to open the floor for discussion for everyone here who's joining us on Q&A and also on site. So throughout the program, please feel free to add your questions in the chat button that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're here as part of our members watch party downstairs, please send your questions or let Krista know your questions. I can imagine she's probably waving her hand right now to let you know where she is in the theater space. So now it is my honor to introduce our guests this evening, photographer Bill Aron and Vicki Reikes Fox. So you see here, there's an image that I think was taken just last month or so. So Bill Aron is a world-renowned photographer who has been featured in over 20 solo shows and whose work is housed in numerous permanent collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Jewish Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art. Vicki Reikes Fox is the founding project director of the original Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience in Utica. Vicki is also a very well-known museum curator, educator, and visual artist. Her exhibitions include Hands-On Kamsa Exchange and Concealed and Revealed the Matriarch Curses. And I believe she also has an example of her artwork behind her in her Zoom screen tonight. So now that we have some of our introductions, let's jump into the history of the project itself. So in terms of the history of this project, as I said, I'm currently standing in our special exhibition gallery, and we selected the Bill Aron photographs as the inaugural exhibition because it tied in so many themes within the museum itself. But while this is a currently on view exhibition, it was really over 30 years in the making. And I began, I suppose, almost 200 miles away in Utica, Mississippi. So Vicki Reikes Fox, as I mentioned, was the founding project director and curator for the original museum. So she and Bill embarked on a road trip across the American South to capture photographs of Southern Jewish life in people's workplaces, in synagogues, around the family Seder table as well. And it's really become a priceless time capsule, a moment in time of these Southern Jewish communities, both urban and rural as well. Now, as we'll talk about in a moment, this inaugural trip, and I believe it was 1988, but Bill and Vicki, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. This first road trip turned into several more along the way. But to start the conversation, Bill and Vicki, first of all, welcome. And do you mind telling us a little bit more what brought about this project? Why did this photography trip happen? And what brought the two of you together?
So the project began because we were inaugurating the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, and we had galleries to fill. But as often as in the South, when immigrants came, they did not have a treasure trove of Judaica like New York immigrants might have had, or other larger cities. So we had galleries to fill. And we also had to fulfill the mission of the museum, which was to tell the story of the Southern Jewish experience. And it seemed like a contemporary artist or contemporary photographer like Bill Aron, who had done that among Jewish communities in Russia and in Cuba, was the right person to tag. So I actually knew Bill from the community in Los Angeles. And so Macy Hart and I approached him to see if he would be interested and willing to come along on this journey.
Mm-hmm. And Macy Hart was the founding director, again, of the original Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience in Utica, Mississippi. And I think, Vicki, you mentioned in some of our conversations that, you know, the start of this project was Macy Hart's Rolodex. So the different connections and individuals that he's met along the way. So can I ask, how did you select some of the communities to visit on that first road trip?
So actually, I did just use the people that Macy knew and just cold called them and told them what we were doing. And they frankly thought it was a little strange. What do you mean you're looking for the Southern Jewish experience? That's what we are. And that was sort of the hardest thing to help people understand. We were looking to photograph it. And so I would call people, and if they seemed like they were willing, or if they seemed like they were in a setting or had a business that might be particularly picturesque, then that's where we started. So we would just map out a circle that we would drive through. We usually did 2-week trips, 10 days to 2 weeks. And we would go from place to place, appointment to appointment. And then I'll turn it over to you, depending, to talk about what would happen when we would get there.
I think those are some of the fun stories I think we're going to explore tonight. So as we know, this first road trip turned into a 14-year-long project. In addition to Vicki, I know, Bill, that you worked with well-known scholars in Southern Jewish history, so Marcy Cohen Ferris and Dale Rosengarten. So can you tell me how or why were you able to extend this first road trip into a 14-year-long project?
Well, it's hard to believe that the first trip was 25 years ago. First of all, I have to say that, or 23 years ago. I remember clearly Vicki and Macy came over to my house and we sat in my living room and they proposed this project. And I thought to myself, how many Jews could there be in the South? And my first project took me 10 years. I'll whip this one out and get another book. Well, I had no idea the extent of the Jewish communities in the South. I also, to the shame of my college geography teacher, had no sense of the distances between places. I thought I could photograph in Little Rock, Arkansas one morning and the next morning in the afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi. So part of it was getting around, and part of it, as Vicki said, once we entered a community, we found so much to do. We were constantly pushing our schedules back, and at a certain point, we decided, well, we have to come back here on another trip to finish what we really need to do in this place.
Absolutely. And so now we have this 14-year-long project, and this is not the first exhibition of these images. So I know there have been several outcomes and projects that have come from these mini photography road trips. So I wanted to talk in particularly about one that's probably well known. And actually on Zoom right now, I can see some of our members and also other visitors and guests who have if you don't mind, just wave your hand if you've heard of Shalom Y'all before, or the photography of Bill Aron. Just raise your hand in your screen so that we can see that. Okay, I'm seeing several hands here. I'll say one of the ways that I became introduced to Bill and Vicki was actually through this book here. And I apologize, I somewhere along the way lost the cover of it. So this is the Shalom Y'all book. And so this is a compilation that came out of all of these photography trips. And you can see there are even ragged post-it notes that came from Vicki, Bill, and my conversations about this exhibition right here. So how did the book come about? Was it something that you had planned to do from the very first trip, or is it something that, you know, sort of crystallized much later?
Vicki, you want to take this?
No, I was going to suggest you. So Bill actually was much more famous than the museum, with books to his credit already. So Bill, why don't you talk about how this one came into being? Because you really were the spearhead behind it.
Well, it seemed like a natural thing to do. I mean, first of all, I have to say that to talk about the culture of a place, you really need faces to look at and stories to tell of the people. And one of the things I like to do in my photography is collect stories as I go, and then try and give a visual expression, particularly in portraiture, from the stories that I'm finding. And the book seemed like a natural extension. And Vicki and I, we were kind of winding down on our road trips and decided that it was time to call home. And the book became like a signature that, you know, yours truly, Bill and Vicki, to end the project with. I mean, there's still a lot to do, but we felt like it was enough to give a good portrait of what we were finding.
Absolutely. And I suppose little did you know you'd be invited back again and again for special exhibitions and conversations like this one tonight. So I think there are a lot of PSs maybe that have come about since that book.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've talked a little bit about the history of this project, I'd love to dive into some of the images that we've discussed along the way. And again, this museum, so much of it is about storytelling. That's the power in these images. And we've had discussions about how these photographs are like a visual vador from generation to generation. So they're snapshots in time that have so many stories behind them. So I thought we could start with this image, which in a lot of ways has become a very iconic image. Is actually on our front windows here in the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. So just to kick it off, a question that I get a fair number of times when people see this in our galleries is, was this staged, or were you able to just come up to Cary, Mississippi on Erev Shabbat and find a pecan pie?
Well, we were looking for the quintessential image that was both Southern and Jewish. And Bill knew from the beginning that that's what I was hoping to find. So Bill, but I'll let you address this image in particular.
Well, Macy approached us and he wanted an image for a poster. And during that trip, we went to the farm or the plantation of Ben and Betty Lee Lamensdorf. And it was in the spring, just after they had planted the cotton, and the fields were bare. And there was a little house standing off to the side. And I asked Ben if we could come back when the cotton was in full bloom, to photograph out the window. I didn't have the idea of having a Shabbat table in the foreground was actually Betty Lee's idea. And when I showed up, she put together this wonderful Shabbat table for us to photograph. So in part, it was found, and in part, it was set up. We wanted something, as Vicki said, to symbolize both Southern and Jewish. We came out early in the morning. Cotton is a very time-sensitive crop. And so we judged my trip to be on what we think would, or what we thought would be the optimal time in the getting ready for the harvest. As it turned out, there was either too much rain or too little rain, and the cotton came due about a week before we arrived. And if you don't pick cotton at its peak, it degrades very quickly. So Ben had the entire plantation plowed, except for what I could see from this window. So off to the right side, our right side of the image, there were quite a number of these huge mammoth mechanized cotton pickers. Whatever room you're in, double the size of it, both up and out. And those are the sizes of them. So I did, knowing that they were waiting off the side, I photographed as much as I could from as many angles as I could. And when I could think of nothing more to do, I told the foreman that I was done, and he got on his radio to tell his men they could start working. I bent down to put my cameras away, and by the time I put my cameras away, closed the camera bag, and stood back up, the entire field had been plowed, and it was just sticks showing where the cotton had been.
That's amazing. So can I ask, do you remember, did you eat the challah or pecan pie? Do you remember that?
No, we didn't.
So moving on to the next image, so much about your portraiture and your photography is about relationships. And this is an image of the hearts in Eudora, Arkansas. And I think that this really speaks to the skill of Vicki of bringing people together, and Bill of capturing this intimate moment. So can you tell me a little bit more about how this image came about?
Well, I was told to, when we were headed to Eudora, Arkansas, that we would be photographing the last Jew of Eudora, Arkansas. And Vicki and I had the address of his liquor store. And we arrived there, and he was expecting us, and we had a really nice visit. And first time he mentioned his wife. And I thought, well, maybe she's not alive anymore. Maybe they're not married anymore. So I didn't say anything. But after the third time he mentioned his wife, I said, well, where is she? And he said, well, she's at home. She's not Jewish. So I said, well, that doesn't matter. We want her in the photograph too. So he called his wife. She came down, and we played around and we laughed. And I just happened to catch this particular image. When we were speaking afterwards, Harold told me that he was married by Rabbi Stone in Greenwood. And I knew of Rabbi Stone, and I knew that he was an Orthodox rabbi. And I blithely said, no, you couldn't have been, because an Orthodox rabbi won't perform an intermarriage. And he says, oh yeah, I have a certificate at home to prove it. So we went back to his house, the four of us, we were sitting around, and Harold brings out this 8.5 by 11 manila envelope, and I pull out, and indeed it was a marriage certificate signed by Rabbi Stone. And alongside, when I pulled it out, there was this folded up white piece of paper, and I opened up the paper, and it said, Lucille and Harold, or Harold Hart and Lucille with her maiden name, have come before me in the house of Israel this day, and Lucille has freely consented to join the people Israel. So I said, Lucille, you're Jewish. And she was delighted. She said, can I be buried in a Jewish cemetery? I said, of course you can. Here's what happened as I understand it. There are three, if I can remember them, three requirements for conversion. One is that you study. Well, Harold, before the ceremony, or the rabbi, had quizzed Lucille on the Bible, and she had had a good Baptist upbringing. So she knew, she was well-versed in the Bible. And at one point, the Rabbi Stone turned to Harold and said, Harold, if you knew as much about the Bible as the woman you're marrying, you'd be a good Jew. The second requirement is that you do this freely. Well, Rabbi Stone asked Lucille if she would go to synagogue with Harold. And she said, of course, he's my husband. I'll go to synagogue with him. So she's doing it freely. The third requirement is that you attend a mikvah, a ritual bath. What Rabbi Stone did about that, I have no idea. Maybe he figured she had had a good shower that morning, but he signed the certificate. He married them, signed the certificate, and also signed the conversion certificate as well.
I think there are so many things that, I really love about this story. And one of them is that, yours and Vicki's trips were not passive trips. They're very much something where you engage with these individuals, you changed people's perceptions, even identities, of themselves as well. So I think along the way, you were just capturing the Southern Jewish experience, you were helping to build on it as well. So continuing this theme of relationships, I'd love to go to the next image, which I think is going to be a well-known image for many. So this is Joe Martin Erber and then his uncle, Meyer Gelman, and they're here pictured in Greenwood, Mississippi. So again, can you tell me a little bit more about, first of all, why you selected this image and what you find interesting about it?
So Meyer Gelman was showing us around the synagogue in Greenwood, Mississippi. And his nephew, Joe Martin Erber, who was a mail carrier, drove by the synagogue and saw his uncle's car. And it was the middle of the day in the middle of the week. So he had to wonder, why is my uncle there? So he parked his mail truck and he came in and to investigate, why was his uncle there? Small towns, we always know what everybody's doing. We're quite aware of people's movement. So something as strange as this, he wanted to see what happened. Well, when he walked in, I was intrigued by his postal cap, and Bill was intrigued by his very snazzy mustache. And both things added up to what we thought would make an excellent image. And so this is one of the images that has become iconic for this body of work. And it was just serendipity, but it turned out to be one of those wonderfully magic moments.
Absolutely. I love this image, how you can see on the left, Joe Martin Erber, he has that hat on. And I would say that's one of the most remarked things when people walk through the gallery, they say, is that a postal service hat? And, we get to share that story with them. Right. And again, I believe his uncle has since passed away. So this is, I think, also a very, treasured family photograph as well. So moving on to another very well-known photograph. This is Henrietta Levine, and here she is pictured in her kitchen in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Love the wallpaper, very much so, of this image. And for people who have visited the special exhibition gallery while this is on view, this is also a place for an interactive where we invite people to share their food memories, recipes from home, things that taste and smell and cook like memories of their growing up years. And we also have a special surprise for our viewers that we'll show in just a minute. But can you tell me a little bit more about what we're seeing here in the bowl?
So when the question was posed, who makes the best chopped liver in the South, Henrietta Levine was the unanimous choice. So she made the recipe, and Bill actually photographed the entire process. So for your edification, here's the recipe. You want from the very beginning? I put my livers in a little Wesson oil and chop up onion and let them cook until the onion gets brown. I cook 6 to 8 eggs until they are hard. Then I put chopped up onion in the bowl with the eggs and the livers, and then I add the chicken fat. I cut up a lot of onions and add a little salt and let it cook real slow, and it will finally render out. It is a pretty color because it has so much onion in it. A little more salt, and that is it. And then, so Bill has something to add to this because it was Bill's first experience with Southern Jewish foodways. And many of the others of us who grew up in the South know about fried chicken, Shabbat dinners. We're very familiar with lox, bagels, and grits, but there were some new aspects of Southern Jewish food that Bill first encountered on these trips.
I just want to say that Henrietta was just a delight to photograph. She was jolly, humorous, and also very serious about her cooking. She had a wooden bowl and a, what's it called? What you chop with? The chopper, if you will. Right. The same one as my mother had. And the recipe, if my tastes are accurate, is pretty close to what my mother used to make. But anyway, at a certain point, when she was nearing the end, I said, "Hey, how about a taste of that?" And she looked at me, broke out into a laugh, and just thrust the bowl up towards me. And I was lucky enough to be ready.
All right, and if you'll excuse me going off camera for just one moment, I'm going to get a special artifact to show everyone. So just one moment. All right, so what we have, if you can see my my video screen here today, we actually have Henrietta Levine's chopping bowl as seen in the photograph here today. So this was just actually donated only a few months ago by Henrietta Levine's family. And this is an example at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience that we're continuing to find artifacts and stories and memories that are coming out of these photographs over the years. So I'll also encourage anyone as you come along and you see your family or your community represented, if you know of other photographs or artifacts from these images, we'd love to hear about them. But this is just such a special treat that we have this available now in our permanent collection. So now, while I put this away, and many thanks to Lizzie Meister, our public programs manager, she's handling all of the tech tonight. So Lizzie, if we want to go ahead and go to the next image, I'll be able to put this up.
Michael Shackleton, as you know, no doubt, as everybody here no doubt has surmised, I like to interact with the people that I'm photographing, and I never do, especially a portrait, without some level of interaction and moving around and trying different kinds of prompts on my part. Michael was very interesting. When he immigrated to the States, he came to New York, and he didn't like the crowded living conditions in New York. So he left the city and made his way south, and eventually wound up in New Orleans, where he started 2 or 3 businesses, each of which failed. And one day when he was eating lunch in a restaurant, he noticed that that everyone in the restaurant was eating shrimp. So he thought, hey, this would be a good business. And the rest is history. He started, Vicki knows the name of the company, he started an import company for the shrimp. And it became quite a significant and successful business in the city. Vicki, it was named after his daughters, right?
Named after his 2 daughters. So I think it's S&D. Deborah is one of them, and then the oldest one is, if someone can help me out here, I'd appreciate it. Those Shackletons.
You can put it in the chat.
Okay.
Anybody who knows.
Yes, exactly.
You can also see that's one of the images that are it's right behind me in the special exhibition gallery. And again, the topic of trace comes up a fair amount also in our discussions of Southern Jewish foodways. And I have to ask Bill, along the way, you've told me that you've learned the secret to the fluffiest matzo balls. And I'll just interrupt quickly to say Sarah Shackleton is the answer. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, exactly.
Sarah, right.
Sarah.
Right. Vicki and I, whenever we would address a group in the South, we would ask them what's Southern and what's Jewish. And in one particular gathering, a woman stands up and says, well, we have a secret for making our matzo balls hold together and stay nice and fluffy. And that's that we put bacon fat into the matzo balls.
So that's
It's
That's a
very
little
hard
lesson
to
from the
tell
Southern
these
Jewish
stories. It's very difficult to tell these stories without hearing any reaction from the audience.
So again, it's the wonderful like stories that come out from these images that you're sharing. So along the way, I know that you also faced challenges setting up different shots. And Vicki, a lot of times you had to serve as crowd control for certain photographs as they were being taken. So Lizzie, if we can progress to the next image. And this is a preservation hall, very well known, especially to our guests and members here in New Orleans. So can you tell us a little bit about who this photograph depicts and maybe some of the challenges that you had in getting this shot?
Yes, I love what this represents. A Jewish couple who started Preservation Hall because their love of jazz, and this is Sandra Jaffe in the middle. In the middle, she and her husband. He was already deceased at this time, but they started Preservation Hall, and it also represents the deep, rich musical traditions of New York. So our experience was that they said yes, they would be happy for us to come and photograph, and we would set up and take the photograph in between sets. So if you have been to Preservation Hall, you know that people wait in line and then they file in when it's time. They sit down on benches and then they hear their musical set and then they file out and the next group comes in. So Bill was setting up between sets, his lights, a ladder, his cameras, and in only a few minutes, the audience was gone and the new audience has filed back in and sitting down waiting for their music. Well, as he worked and sweated and focused, the audience began to get impatient. They began to call out, they began to heckle Bill and even throw things at him. He continued to be focused. I was squirming, I couldn't stand it. But he was able to capture with his patience this fabulous photograph. The musicians were wonderfully cooperative. It was just that audience.
Vicki, I want to add that the room is not much bigger than what you see, either towards the back or towards the sides, and it's very dark. The people are lit because of the strobe lights that I traveled with, but when there's no flash, you can't see anything. So I'm struggling in the dark to focus and to worry about the framing, whether I'm getting everybody, the whole band into the shot. And I'm aware people are yelling and throwing things like popcorn and such, but it was probably the most difficult shot we had in our meanderings around the South.
Yeah, it turned out wonderfully. This is personally one of my favorites of the road trips. So now these are some of the images that we've had on display. The next image we're going to talk about is one that's actually not currently on view in the exhibition, and it's not included in our flick book of Bill Aron photography that's downstairs in Gallery 3. So this depicts the Gartenberg's store that's in Hot Springs, Arkansas. So I think Bill, you were the first one to sort of suggest this might be a great image to show that's not on view. Can you tell us a little bit more about Gartenberg's?
Yeah, I'd like to read a story that Bob, a gentleman way in the back, told me about his family. He said, because I want to get the details right. In 1898, a Jewish acquaintance of my grandfather's walks into the store and says to him, "You're not married. Would you like to be?" My grandfather says, "Who would marry me? I'm just getting started and I don't have very much. Look around." In those days, people who couldn't afford to buy a pair of shoes, they would buy a set of mismatched shoes. There were stores that sold shoes singly. So you found two shoes that looked in your size that looked reasonably well together. And that's the kind of store that Bob's grandfather had. The other man says, "I have a sister. Here, let me show you a picture. This is Carrie. Isn't she beautiful?" Indeed, she was very beautiful. So my grandfather says, "Okay." They traveled to New Orleans and the man introduced my grandfather to Carrie. This is not the woman in the picture, my grandfather says. No, the man says, this is her sister. The woman in the picture is Lena, who is married and lives in Shreveport. Would you like to marry Carrie? She is single and available. My grandfather thinks, well, I have no other prospects, and I did come all this way to New Orleans. He says, okay, and they marry. They have 3 children and we're very happy. I think it worked out very well.
Yeah, I guess we have the prototype of J-date here in the Bill Aron exhibition.
Yeah, well, of course, you know, when the man walked into the store and says, you're not married, would you like to be? You know, that's a Jewish acquaintance. Sort of redundant to say he is.
That's great. And Vicki, were you on this road trip when this shot was taken?
I was not, so I didn't meet the Gartenbergs.
Okay, so now moving on, again, staying within sort of the store world, the economics world. This is an image that I think for many represents changing communities. So here in our special exhibition, we have it segmented into 4 different areas. One is about sacred spaces, other is about working communities, another is about the sense of place. And this specific section about changing community is about how spaces and communities shift and transform over time. So Vicki, can you tell me a little bit more about what appears to be an Ace Hardware store in Donaldsonville?
So, but it is the Ace Hardware store now, but it used to be the synagogue in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, Congregation B'Chor Cholim, on the town square. It was the end of the day, and Bill and I had arrived in Donaldsonville just as the light of the day was dwindling. And if we didn't stop and photograph now, then we were going to be continuing on and we would not get back to Donaldsonville. And I had been here on a previous trip with Macy, and we had gone in, they had let us go in, and we had gone up to the attic looking to see if we could find any remnants of the synagogue. It had been a Ace Hardware store for a long time. The Jewish community had been gone from Donaldsonville for a while. So we were in the middle of the town square, and it was a Friday night and in a small town. So Bill set up his camera and he opened up, had a long shutter speed. And as the teenagers began to drive around the square on a Friday night, they took notice of us and they began to hoot and holler. They began to honk their horns, and they continued to drive around, and then new cars were added as they would let their friends know, and that this was the Friday night happening in Donaldsonville. And what happened is, as they continued to go around, the lights that were caught in this long shutter speed is what you see in the front of this image. So it is actually one of my favorite images because of the experience. But again, Bill's patience paid off. He wasn't to be scared away by teenagers in Donaldsonville and stood there as long as it took. And there's this fabulous image. This image is in black and white, but he also shot in color along the way for some images. So we also have this one in color, which is one of my favorites. And it's sort of a wonderful example of the stories that are in the images. So here, if you look at it, you would never know that there was this story that happened, but it also makes me reflect back on the long Jewish community, these French and German settlers who had moved to Donaldsonville, Louisiana, and what their Jewish experiences were throughout the years that they were living there. So I'm just intrigued once again by looking at these photographs after all these time and having to think of remembering all of the layers of Jewish experiences which this one photograph encapsulates.
Absolutely.
Vicki, I'll just add that there's almost no light in this particular area. They're way, way off to the left. There's a not very bright street lamp. And so the entire building is really lit by the headlights from the cars that are passing back and forth. And it was very fortuitous because I don't think, without those cars, I don't think it would have been a usable image at all.
First of all, there's a like a sub theme of heckling that I didn't realize would go throughout, these photographs, which is great. I'm, learning here in this conversation here. And I'm wondering also if there's anyone who's on the Zoom or downstairs right now, if you've been to Donaldsonville recently, I'd be interested to see if this Ace Hardware store is still in existence, or if that too has changed over time as well. So moving on, again, talking about transformation and change within a community. The next photograph, I think, is also one of our most talked about photographs in the exhibition. And so this is the congregation in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I know, Vicki, you and I especially have had many conversations about this photograph in particular. And I'd love to hear you, summarize some of your thoughts about what speaks to you about this image.
So Bill, I want you to tell us what actually happened, but I'm just going to give a little background. So Shreveport has had a Jewish community since 1861, before the Civil War, and which I find fascinating. And this building is actually, while it's not their synagogue building anymore, they've moved to another area of town and built a building that met their needs more in the 50s and 60s. But it is on was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. But it's that whole thing, Anna, about the stories from every photo shoot, but that all of the lives that and the Jewish experiences of the people who went to synagogue in this congregation, who were married here, who were educated here. And we know the South is actually, in particular, just like the Gartenberg story, where, relatives got married, they got introduced to each other. That was really an important part of Jewish community, was to introduce your unwed children to each other, so that they could find Jewish marriages and create Jewish families and continue that Southern Jewish experience. So that is one of the things that this photograph evokes for me.
And I'll just say we're nearing the time when we'll get to our questions and answers. So please add your questions in the chat below, and we'll get around to some of those at the end. But before we do, I would love for us to now switch over to another favorite image that's in the exhibition. So this is Bob Coleman of New Orleans, Louisiana. And it's actually such a popular image that we have it as a mural here in our special exhibition gallery. So can you tell me a little bit more about what this depicts, and who Bob Coleman is, and how you even got in touch with each other?
Sure, you have to change the slide. Good. Bob was the owner of a Mardi Gras costume store in New Orleans. Great guy. A good background in photography, a good background is hard to find. And when I saw this wall, I figured, whatever I do here, this has to be it. Although there were a lot of holes in the wall, it wasn't completely covered. So Bob and I went about hanging more masks to fill up, and so you don't see the pegboard behind. A mentor of mine, Arnold Newman, photographer, he used like to say that he was solely a portrait photographer. He'd like to say that photography is 80% furniture moving. So we did a lot of prop moving in this one. In the beginning, I put this on my business cards, but everybody would look at it and say, "Is this you?" So I had to go away from that. But it was great. I mean, we talked while I was setting up my lights, and I happened to be ready when he told this joke, and then burst into this resounding laughter.
I want to give a quick side note. We've had some responses about the Ace Hardware store in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. So Karen Scher has gotten on. She said that at least as of 4 years ago, she believes it was still there. And then this is one of the reasons I love our community. Lou Lewis has already sent an image of the hardware store presently to us. So we'll find a way maybe to share that on social media later, so you can see a little bit of a before and after of that Ace Hardware store.
And Anna, Vicki, I think there's still a Jewish cemetery in Donaldsonville, isn't there?
There is
Mhm.
definitely a Jewish cemetery. One thing that many of these communities, even when the synagogue closed, is they took care of the perpetual care of their synagogue. So throughout the South, even if there are no longer viable Jewish communities, the cemeteries are well cared for.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I think we have time for one more image before we jump to the questions. I see some questions are being added here as well. So Lizzie, if you don't mind progressing to the next image. So again, we talked about some of the challenges of setting up images and photographs ahead of time. But this particular shot of two twins in New Orleans, actually, I think you've mentioned some of the challenges that are surrounding the photograph itself. So do you mind describing a little bit about what happened here?
Vicki, you want to talk about, since we have one more, this one or the Leopold Levy headstone?
No, let's just, we can finish on this one. I'm going to tell one part and then you'll finish,
Okay.
Bill. So one of the things we did travel with is we brought our own props. So we carried challah with us. And if the photograph was in need of props, then we just whipped out our challah. So we were at the JCC and we asked the nursery school if we could do some photography, and we found the chalot especially good with this photograph.
After this trip was over, I forget if it was the end of the trip or if it happened during the trip, but the mother was irate that we had photographed her children. And I found out that she was a very recent immigrant from the former Soviet Union. And I had been to the Soviet Union to photograph. And so I know the mindset of everybody who's always watching out for KGB. In fact, in the synagogue on Yom Kippur, when I started a photograph, I was told later there was a big commotion, and this was in Leningrad, and people thought when I took out my camera that I was KGB in the beginning. So I understood, and I said, okay, we won't use the picture. Serendipitously, when we were getting ready for the book, I really wanted to include this picture. And I was at an exhibition of my photographs. This woman came up to me and said, I know the mother of the twins that you photographed, and I know all about that story. And I said, oh, please tell me how to get in touch with her. So she gave me a phone number and an address, and I called her up and introduced myself, the mother, and asked if we could use the picture. Well, her children at this point were grown. They were in high school, I think. And she asked them, and they were just thrilled that they would be in a book of photographs. They didn't know they were going to be on the cover at that point. So it's a nice little story.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're still looking for, if you know one of the twins today, we would love, or both of the twins, we would love to talk with them. So if you happen to have contact with them, let us know, and we'd like to schedule an interview, an oral history interview with them. So again, you can put that information in the chat. Or
Anna, their last name is Maymad, M-A-Y-M-I-D.
Perfect, thank you for that. So now I would love for us to jump over to some of the questions that have come up in the chat. So one of them is from Leslie Feldman, and she says, hello there. My grandparents are in the Shalom Y'all photo of Holocaust survivors in New Orleans. Could you share your memories of spending time with their group and how you decided to frame that photograph?
A photograph I don't believe is in the book. I'm not I don't quite remember, but yes, when we were in New Orleans, we definitely, when we heard about the group, we wanted to meet with them, and we did spend a lovely evening. And I gathered them all out on the ground, looking over a balcony that was, we were on the second floor, and photographed them from there. They were lovely people. Vicki, you remember more?
So I do, and part of photographing them was just trying to get the broadest experience and representation we could. And so the South, in fact, was a place where Holocaust survivors did immigrate. Each of the communities have always been involved in bringing immigrants, small groups, when they could. And in my own town of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, I remember a number of shopkeepers were Holocaust survivors. I remember seeing their numbers, actually their tattoos on their arms when they were going through their, daily work. I remember that was definitely part of the experience. So it would be something we wanted to include. So thank you for mentioning that for us.
Yeah.
And I think there were a few Holocaust survivor communities that you photographed throughout this project. I think that was part of some of the later trips as well. I believe was in Charleston, Bill.
Yes.
We worked with Dale Rosengarten on one of photographing one of the Holocaust survivor communities. So we have a question in the chat. Did you discover any folks who didn't realize that they were Jewish? I think that the heart story is one instance of that. But did you have any other instances of surprising Jewish identity?
I don't remember. And I think one thing that did happen is because we started with an individual and we were passed along within a community, we would be talking and asking questions. When we would arrive someplace, as Bill was setting up, I would begin to engage the people who we were meeting and try to begin to collect the stories. And if they gave us other names, they might pick up the phone and say, I'm getting ready to send this photographer and this woman he's traveling with over. So I don't remember any of the surprise. And that was probably because we were sort of what I would call in network, right? We were, within that Jewish network.
Mm-hmm. That famous Jewish geography that's in the South and everywhere.
I do remember at the very beginning, and this is a story before we even did the photography, but this is when I was traveling with Macy originally to see if there was enough of Southern Jewish stories. People did not quite know who we were, what we were doing. So we were going to Laurel, Mississippi, and Laurel, Mississippi had the synagogue there had been an unfortunate accident, and the synagogue there had burned down, but apparently there were a couple of Torahs. Well, the community didn't know who we were, and what our mission was. So apparently they took the Torahs and they hid them in somebody's trunk of their car, because in case we were coming to take their Torahs. So we had to develop trust, and but over the years that we really did develop, and then people began to look forward to it.
I was gonna say, you really laid the foundations for the museum as it is today. I mean, so far, I've been lucky enough that no one's hid, their Torahs in trunks so far, but I think it's thanks to you two, probably. Another interesting question, and actually something that I'm very curious about as well, why black and white photography instead of the color images?
Well, I came of age in the heyday of black and white street photography. And so it's, I just continue. And also in the 1970s and 80s, color really wasn't very good. And only really began to mature in the 90s. When I did a project photographing Holocaust survivors, not your usual, in Southern California, not your usual pictures of them showing their tattoo, but rather being happy and settled and thriving in their communities. And I did that. I did do that in color intentionally because I thought color would better convey the mood and of who they are.
Are those images available anywhere, or are you open to display of them at some point?
I certainly am open, and they are available in this book. It's called New Beginnings, The Triumphs of 100 oh no, I'm sorry. I'm completely, I'm embarrassed. I completely misread or misthought the words that you said. No, they are on display, and after we finished the project, I tried to find a publisher, and nobody seemed interested in displaying photographs of Holocaust survivors who not only survived, but survived well and built incredible lives for themselves, gave back to their communities. And so we just, after a while, just gave up. So that they are the photographs that I took, I think 100 of them are on display at Chapman University, who the grant to do that project originated with a group of Holocaust survivors called the 1939 Club, but they had one of their members give the grant to Chapman University, which was just starting their Holocaust Studies department. And they used part of the money that they got to sponsor that the project that I did. So they are on my hard drive. So, and they're at Chapman University in Orange County, California.
Great. All right, so we're almost at the end. We just have a couple of minutes left. So for our final question, are there any images that we have not talked about that you would like to talk about?
Vicki, you should mention about the Leopold Levy headstone.
Okay. Lizzie, can you put that one up? Okay. So there are lots of synagogues and lots of Jewish cemeteries throughout the region. And to Bill's surprise, he photographed enough synagogues to produce a book of them on its own. But this headstone is one of the most interesting to me. So if you look down at the bottom of the text, you will see it's all in English, and at the very bottom are the 5 Hebrew letters that mean, may he rest in peace. And it's very common on Jewish headstones, and it is upside down and backwards. And it just makes me think, if you can imagine this stonecutter in Port Gibson, Mississippi, when a family member of Leopold Levy brought the text, including the Hebrew, to this man. And then he looks at it, and by the time he goes to carve it 11 months later, he doesn't know what's upside down and what's right side up. And there we have this tombstone with Hebrew upside down and backwards in Port Gibson, Mississippi. So this is one of my favorite images because I can just imagine the story behind it. We'll never know exactly, we'll just have to speculate, but that's my speculation.
Oh, this has been
I will mention in a very different vein that my goal in traveling around the South in terms of finding Jewish and Southern was to find a banjo with an inlaid Star of David, but never did.
No success.
Everybody listening knows of one, please let me know.
Absolutely. So you can email us at info@msje.org if you have that connection and make Bill's day. Bill and Vicki, thank you so much. This has been such an invaluable conversation. And, again, these were just, I think, 8 or 9 images out of the over 40 that are on display in our special exhibition gallery, out of a couple of hundred that you have produced over those 14 years. So for those of you who have not yet had an opportunity, we hope you'll visit the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. The show will be on view through April 24th, 2022. And for those of you who have had an opportunity to visit, I hope you'll join us in early 2022 because we have some expanded content that we're going to be adding to this exhibition, including hearing more of these stories in Vicki and Bill's own words and own voices as well. So again, Bill and Vicki, thank you so very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, please visit us on our website where we can stay connected. And we are very much looking forward to our next conversation. Bill and Vicki are going to be joining us in person next year. So again, if you want information on that, follow us on social media and join us on our member newsletter as well. So thank you everyone and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.